Are GPs punishing patients by voting for industrial action? It's time for our head-to-head. Yes, that's right, folks. GPs today voted overwhelmingly in favour of industrial action. In a row over the new funding allocation for surgeries, the BMA has told GPs to choose from a range of measures designed to wreak havoc across the NHS. The number of appointments available each day could be slashed by up to a third. While the BMA insists the target isn't patients, it comes just hours after the Health Secretary Wes Streeting pleaded with GPs not to vote for strike action, warning that, quote, taking collective action will only punish patients. So tonight I'm asking, are GPs punishing patients to get more money? Let me know your thoughts. gbnews.com/your say, or tweet me at gbnews and do vote in the poll. But first, going head to head, I'm delighted to welcome political commentator and broadcaster Christine Hamilton and junior doctor and trainee GP Dr. Basha Mukherjee. Dr. Basha Mukherjee, thank you so much for joining us. Is this industrial action justified?
So I think you used the term earlier on about GPs trying to punish patients. But the truth is that the way the current times are, patients are already getting punished. And if we want to stop things getting worse, this is the only option. Bear in mind, the recent GP contract was rejected by GPs months ago, and nothing was done since then. So as usual with this government, and as well as the last one, I don't know if Wes Streeting is going to turn things around, but, you know, this is becoming a pattern of the government working reactively rather than proactively to prevent harm being done to patients.
However, Dr. Mukherjee, which other government department do you think this pay deal should be coming from?
Well, here's the thing. The cuts have been happening for years now. There's been 20% cut in the funding towards GP. And if you think about it, GPs see 90% of the patients in this whole country, and they only get 8% of the NHS pie. All we're asking for is a better overall amount, a percentage of the NHS pie.
Well, as you know, the country is running a budget deficit. We've got a national debt of over $2 trillion. So does the money come out of the education department, policing, or do we borrow more, perhaps, for future generations to pay?
I think that is for the Chancellor to work out, really. We're just in clinical staff, we're patient-facing. And earlier, what you were talking about, the slashing of appointments, it would mean that a GP would get to see a patient with 15 minutes rather than 10 minutes appointments. And actually, I would argue that in a way, actually, that's probably better for patients. I mean, you're probably aware when you go to see a GP, you get ushered out of the door, your GP is too busy typing, because we've got to fit all of this in within 10-minute slots. And we have to be watching the clock, which is such a nauseating feeling. We don't feel rewarded by the process of seeing patients as it stands at the moment.
OK, Christine Hamilton, my viewers and listeners are, many of them, struggling to get a GP appointment at the best of times. Perhaps the government should settle so we can have a functioning NHS.
Well, that's what Rachel Reeves said, isn't it? She said it's much easier to settle than to pay the cost of the strikes. And they've now opened the floodgates by giving 22% to junior doctors. So not surprisingly, everybody else wants to jump on the bandwagon. I mean, GPs, my father was a GP, and I well remember the strikes in 1964. I was 15. And he refused to strike. He was a good old fashioned GP. And what mattered to him was putting his patients first. He would have starved before he refused to see a patient. He worked, 24/7. He would go out in the middle of the night, etc. It was a completely different ballgame. But the fact is now the NHS is broken. It is completely broken. It is not fit for purpose. The GPs should be the front door to the NHS, but it's basically slammed in people's faces, and so they now have to go to A&E with all the resulting...
But isn't that because it's underfunded, Christine? Isn't that why the GPs are threatening industrial action?
You will never, ever, however much money you throw at the NHS, you will never have enough money. You have got to get private money in. They've got to do it. They've got to encourage more people. Tax breaks for people who take out private health insurance and things. the BMA, when they were against the NHS to start with, they're a pretty left-wing trade union, and they are delighted now. They've got a Labour government, so they think, right, this is a soft touch. We spend £180 billion on the NHS. That's £3,000 for every man, woman, and child in the country. So if you take an average family, they're spending £10,000 to £12,000 a year on the NHS, and what are they getting in return? A very inadequate service. So the system simply doesn't work. And you ask where the money's coming from. Well, they've just taken some money, haven't they? Who uses the NHS most? Pensioners, because for obvious reasons. They've just taken a pile of money from pensioners because they've stopped the winter fuel allowance. Now, fine for wealthy pensioners, they don't need it, but millions of pensioners desperately need that. Stop the mad rush to net zero, stop all this nonsense, keep using fossil fuels, frack, etc., and you'll have far more money to go around. But the whole NHS is broken.
Dr. Mukherjee, one possible element of this industrial action is fewer GP appointments. That means that people that aren't well won't be seen. They're going to get iller, and some people inevitably will die. Are you comfortable with that?
I just want to correct you there that actually that is not the only option that's been proposed to GPs. And actually the BMA is asking GPs to work within their contracts. And they have proposed 25 patients as a safe number, actually. And I want to say that there are other options that GPs can engage in order to take part in the collective action.
Any of which will affect the functioning of a GP surgery, which will lead to people not being seen and potentially die.
Well, I would rather argue if we didn't strike and we continued as we are, there are multiple GPs who are committing suicide, leaving, going on long-term sick leave. They are working less than full-time. More and more GPs are working less than full-time. This has a knock-on effect on continuity of care. It has a knock-on effect on the GPs and trainee staff or whoever the doctors are who are working, because we just cannot retain staff. And now the government did come up with a solution according to their standards, which was the R staff, the additional role staff. Now, let me tell you, the additional role staff in my practice, they see a patient every half an hour. They're seeing far fewer patients. They've got a much, they're essentially free to employ by the GP practices. Okay. And there are serious safety concerns with these staff members. This is, with due respect, Christine, I want to say that 1964 is not 2024, unfortunately. We are seeing patients with real complex healthcare. They are, of course, of advanced stage, but we know that more people are dying earlier. And we are seeing patients from other countries who can't speak the language. So there are real complex patients that we're seeing each day.
Dr. Basha, one very brief question, one word answer if you can. Do you regret as a GP that the NHS shut down for 2.5 years for COVID?
I think the way however COVID was managed, that was, it was not really something that we can look back and say, oh, this could have been done differently.
Was it a mistake?
But
should GP surgeries have stayed open? Because that's why we've got a backlog, isn't it?
Well, partially, yes. But I want to say that GPs still continue to see patients. They continue to do telephone appointments. They still try to be as useful as possible to the whole system.
OK. Well, listen, Dr. Basha, what a treat to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Basha Mukherjee. We appreciate your time. A sentence or two. Last word, Christine.
Well, of course, I'm well aware that 1964 isn't the same as now, but a doctor is a doctor. They take the same oath nowadays that they took then. And the moral code and the moral standard that doctors worked to in those days was far higher. And as I said earlier, they put the patients first. Many doctors nowadays seem to put themselves first. And some of them don't work full time and yet they expect a full-time salary. The system is broken and it cannot be fixed by throwing money. We spend 11.3% of GDP on health. The USA spends 16.6%, where Ireland spends 6.1%. However much money we spend, we're not going to fix it. We've got to bring in private money.
A spirited debate. My thanks to Christine Hamilton and Dr. Basha Mukherjee. Who do you agree with? Are GPs punishing patients by voting for industrial action?